this isn't a late April Fool's. This is actually the official catch-up. Chris and Ben have returned from, let's face it, obscurity. You thought we were gone, that we're back. Chris, we're back.
We're back. Aye, the camera's not working, so I had to use my laptop camera for the first time. The mic's not working, so I'm having to use my laptop mic. So totally unprepared, really. But now we're back. I'm happy. Hopefully, all the quality and everything's going to be fine. But I think we sort of hinted at it, didn't we, Ben, that there might be something on the horizon.
We just checked back there. It's 48 weeks since our last episode, so we have a lot has changed in that time. What hasn't changed is Chris still has his beanie and the wooden spoon behind his back.
I had to look out the beanie, but I had to, obviously, the nostalgia spoon needed to come back into the episode. So I know a lot of people have been wanting it, so have to keep the people happy. Yeah.
We couldn't have a podcast at this point. That's definitely important. That's the kind of thing that Gretna normally win, is the wooden spoon, isn't it? My friends at Gretna will get that early for the fan club on the WhatsApp chat there. I know they'll be listening. But yeah, we are back. We're planning to do 3 or 4 episodes towards the end of the season. There's a really important run-in to happen here in the Lowland League with Clydebank, Bonnyrigg, Linlithgow, tonight, all going for first place in the Lowland League and potentially a playoff against Club 42 or the Highland League team and then Club 42 potentially. So, we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about what's been going on. I'm sure there'll be other things we're going to talk about at some point as well, Chris. But yeah, what have you been up to since we've last spoke?
I mean, it's been a year, so it's really hard to put in a perspective what I've been doing all that time, but a lot of training and just keeping myself busy. Obviously, the catch-up always keeps me busy with the team of the months and whatnot. Obviously, the team of the season time now. But yeah, in terms of football, I'm guessing more lax these days, and obviously kind beef at my door. So it's like one of those things where if you do something for as long as sort of me and you, you can get a wee bit jaded. And obviously, this is the first episode where I don't think you've been at the Buffs, Ben.
Yes, obviously. No, that's no great surprise to anyone probably who has followed me on Twitter and social media in the last few weeks. I decided to leave Kilwinning Rangers a few weeks ago. There was going to be a few changes. Ultimately, behind the scenes, a lot of things kind of happening that, I did agree on sometimes and just felt, the chairman was stepping down. I joined the club back, 7 or 8 years ago. Stuck by Colin as the chairman for a number of years. Certainly when I had a bit of kind of turmoil, a few years back with a change of manager and stuff like that. So felt it was right to stick by Colin and Kevin Kelly, who was the manager. Those things were changing, so I think it was a good time for me just to say step back and decompress a little bit and relax and just probably plan my next move, I think.
And obviously, I did notice that you were on the BBC programme Ultras. Should we talk about that a wee bit? Obviously, you're leaving the Buffs has nothing to do with Blair McNally, no?
Absolutely nothing to do with Blair McNally. That's a fact. It was the timing of the documentary was just purely coincidental. I think I filmed some stuff with them when we played Dunny Pace in the South Challenge Cup back in, I think it was like September time or something. And to producer and cameraman and sound crew all came down to Buffs Park to film a game with Blair McNally. Blair McNally, as you've seen in the documentary, was turned away because, from a club perspective, we just felt that Blair, doesn't respect clubs properly, doesn't really follow, what the rules are, whether you agree with them or not in terms of football, pyrotechnics and smoke bombs, pitch invasions and all that. He likes to glorify that. For us as a club, it's just too much of a risk to have, BBC cameras filming that sort of stuff that could lead to us ultimately getting into trouble. So, for me, I think it's, that's why I got involved with the documentary, because there was a lot of discussion about, one side of it in terms of what the Ultras do and what, people like Blair do. And for me, it was about getting involved and just getting to see the kind of other side of it from the club's perspective. And I think, I'm sure you've watched it, Chris, but I think we come across pretty well. I think the club did the right things in terms of what has to happen. I can speak obviously a bit more freely now about it, rather than when I was a club person, it was probably important to kind of keep the kind of party line and make sure that we're consistent with our messaging. But now that I've left, I can be a bit more open, a bit more kind of, I guess, frank about it.
Yeah, and obviously I think it's kind of known that we have different views. I'm more, I guess, indifferent to the Ultras. I mean, I can see both sides. It's great that young supporters supporting their club for potentially you know, the next generation, if you will, of football fans, and then obviously the other side where you've kind of seen it more with sort of consequences that could happen if the ultras maybe go a wee bit too far. And what I will say, I'll play a wee bit devil's advocate here. Obviously, Blair mentioned that in the documentary, and I think it is a fair point from him. I mean, he is putting thousands of eyes on the clubs that he does, and I mean, is that worth any sort of consequences? Does that make anything better in terms of that?
So for me, no, Chris. I think ultimately, as much as the videos get loads of views, I've never had anyone come to Bus Park and say, "Oh, okay, I'm coming to see you because Blair McAnally put a video up."
Right.
You know, don't think people are spending money. Whereas, you know, Sam North has been at my club, you know, 3 times now, roughly. Once kind of during COVID, and once when he covered kind of the old Buffs Park, and then he came to a match, and you know, multiple times if people watched, you know, Sam's videos and came and said, you know, I'm here because I've seen Sam talking about your food or talking about your club in a positive light, and that's the thing for me is that, you know, as long as people are talking about the club in a positive light, they're very much welcome. You know, groundhoppers, vloggers, podcasts, whatever it is, you're more than welcome. But for me, you know, Blair, you know, glorifies the things that are wrong, are not allowed. So I would say not necessarily wrong. I think that's the important part here. You know, the law says you're not allowed to have pyrotechnics and smoke bombs, and I say pitch invasions are not okay, and clubs get into trouble for that happening. Look at Clydebank, you know, a very recent example of Clydebank where they have been given a a suspended sentence, if you like, from the SFA because they had, you know, pyrotechnics at their game in the Scottish Cup against Stranraer. And if they have another incident like that, they'll have a ground closure. You know, so for in the Scottish Cup. So for them, you know, in a game in the future, it could mean potentially a game versus, I don't know, you know, Ayr United or Wraith Rovers or even Rangers or Celtic, you know, getting basically a ground closure, which would be, you know, detrimental with these clubs. And that's the way we look at it. That's well, whether you agree or not, whether or not, you know, pyrotechnics and smoke bombs and things like that bring, you know, atmosphere and colour to the game. They probably do. That's a fair thing to say. But until the law changes, then we can't allow it to happen as a club. You know, we're an SFA licensed club, and that's the thing for me. And the other thing I think is really important around smoke bombs and pyrotechnics and things like that is that the kind of the ultras element that are coming to our games are kids. They're, you know, 11, 12, 13 years old. They shouldn't be having pyrotechnics because they're too young. You know, the law's like 18 plus for fireworks. It's the same thing effectively. So why is somebody like Blair McNally, you know, encouraging that to happen? You should be telling him to stop straight away, not how he paints it as if he's making sure he's been a good person and making sure that it is, you know, done safely. You should just tell him to stop straight away. You know, that's the thing for me is, you know, we can argue till we're blue in the face whether or not this is, you know, a good thing for football or not. But I say for me, until the law changes, it doesn't matter.
I'm not really a massive fan of vloggers in a sense. Certainly not football vloggers, because obviously I've been in Scottish clubs. I've been to most of the grounds. I've been to games. I mean, I've watched maybe a couple of Sam North videos. Norrie Works, obviously, Blair McNally. I think there was one that kind of annoyed me about Blair. I think it was Johnson Bra, Largs Whistle. Remember with all the trouble in that? And I remember vividly at the end of that video, there's police vans going about, and then Blair comes out with something like, "This is Scottish football," and I'm like, really? Police vans and fans, you know, yeah.
And that's the thing, you know. So that if it was another good example of where, you know, he's filming the fighting that's happening behind the goals, and it doesn't help the club because if there's video evidence to show something happened, that just paints the club in a bad light, and regardless of what you think he's doing. And I'll be quite, you know, blunt about it. I believe Blair McAnally's out there for Blair McAnally, nothing else. I don't get a strong fuzzy feeling about the fact he's here to support clubs and do things better for the clubs themselves. And, you know, for me, that's why, you know, he wasn't welcome. That's why we took our stance as we did as a club, and that's why we got involved in the documentary, because the first week, you know, they came and they got rejected. You know, I told the BBC that they wouldn't be welcome with Blair McAnally, but they could certainly come and film the game. But they've obviously chosen still to come to the game and got rejected at the gate. So, you know, that's where we're at. Though I think, you know, I've seen it recently. Blair thinks I've got some sort of personal grudge against him. I don't think that's the case. I think it's more that I don't like what he does, and I don't like how he portrays my football club, and that's just the way that I see it. And yes, I've had some, you know, personal interactions in the past with him that didn't come across great from his perspective. But it's not because of that I dislike the boy. I dislike him because what he's doing. I don't think it's right, and I'm going to stick with that as far as with my club hat on. When I speak for myself as as Ben Grant and things like that, I still feel like I've done the right thing by Kilwinning Rangers, and ultimately that's all I care about. As much as I've left Kilwinning Rangers now, I still have a lot of love for the football club and some of the people that are there, the players and the committee, etc. So, I'm still going to do what's best for Kilwinning Rangers, and that's what we did at the time, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Blair, I think it's how he's built the audience. Like, I don't necessarily blame him personally for everything, but when there's a camera there, you're pointing at 11, 12, 13-year-olds, they're going to act the full way. It's the camera, they're going to... That's how he's built his audience, basically. The kids are going to watch his video, oh, there's me, let's show your mates. I mean, that's how it works, eh? And it's interesting in the Ultras documentary that the BBC blanked all the young guys' faces, eh? So it just shows you that the BBC kind of get it, where Blair, he still needs to learn a wee bit more of sort of personal responsibility for what he's filming, basically. That would be my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I don't imagine that boy's got a PPG, for example, for doing his work. And let's face it, that's his job. So I don't think you'll have that in place. I have that as a club member because I do work with children occasionally around the club, and there's some other people within the committee that have that too. And yeah, we've got to put a lot of effort in to keep our SFA license and stuff like that. And I just think there's a total disregard and a bit of a lack of self-awareness from Blair's part, because I don't think he realises the platform that he has and and what he should be doing with it. We've tried working with the kids and the parents and things like that, and the parents didn't want to entertain it at all. And he keeps talking this, wanting to work with the clubs and work leagues. He could be a role model for this sort of stuff, but for me, he's doing it the wrong way. And as a club, we don't want to support that.
Well, just look at away days. I watched a video recently. I say I'm not a big fan of the vloggers. I have kind of watched more of their content recently because he goes a wee bit further away to places like Norway and stuff like that. But there was one video that, to be honest, I'll get slagged for this, but it almost got me emotional. I took 1,000 people to a non-league game and broke all the records and stuff like that. And I thought that's how you do it. That's how you do vlogs and at that level, for the amount of support and stuff like that. To me, that's more positive than negative,
Oh, absolutely, and that's the thing I think for us that you mentioned the fact that when the camera comes, people turn up, and that's kind of what what we felt. You saw the on the footage, when he turned up to the Peters Hill game, I think it was when he came in the first time. There was like 40 or 50 kids. You saw when the march through the housing estate, there was probably the same 30, 40 kids there. And then we played Dunny Pace in the South Challenge Cup, which I should add is a free under 16s game for us. We offer under 12s free with accompanied adult, and under 16s are free in the South Challenge Cup because that's the South Challenge Cup rules. And then there was no ultras there, so it begs the question about is it worth it? If they aren't going to come every single week and back the team, then I'm not sure it is actually worth it deep down. So somebody mentioned to me on Twitter the other day when I had a respond to I think it was the guy Gully Singh, who's a podcaster himself, who had Blair on and discussed, and that's when Blair kind of called me out, personally. Someone commented on that and said, yeah, but they bring in revenue for the club, but do they really? They might down the line when they become older and they want to maybe support the club, then great, but is 200, 300 quid in the pie still really worth it to a club like Kilwinning Rangers? Probably not for the risk of potentially getting fines or a stadium closure potentially that would have a bigger impact on the club. And my day job is working in cyber security, and I do a lot of work around risk and for companies and things like that. And I think quite analytically when it comes to risk around impact and likelihood. And for me, just it wasn't it wasn't worth it. So that's why it is what it is. And as I say, I don't have any personal grudges against Blair. It's not about that. It's just what he does. It's not what I like and not what the club needs either. But until such time things change, then we'll maybe be open to it. But I should always add, the kids are always welcome at our club. That's not something that we're trying to turn away here. We're just asking to channel it in the right manner. Bring your banner, sing your songs, bang your drum. Absolutely no problem about that. But keep the pyro and the smoke bombs and the flares and pitch invasions, leave that to one side and support your team, support the players, support the manager, and you'll be more than welcome at our football club.
And just before we move on, Danny O'Neill, best centre half in the west of Scotland, for him?
In my opinion, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I know you're giving me a bit of stick there, Chris, but maybe a personal view, but I mean, 100% is in a question of the top three. If you're having a debate, I'm sure we're all going to put them in the top three. Great signing for Kilwinning Rangers to add them to the team. Probably trying out for an experienced centre half. Like Danny's only, I think, 25, but he's been there, done it, won 2 leagues. He's playing that Johnson Borough team. He's a great player, and certainly we're lucky to have him. At Kilwinning, I saw him play yesterday for about half an hour. I actually went to watch Ardea versus Port Glasgow yesterday. My friend Campbell McLean was playing for Ardea on loan, so went to watch him play instead of going down to Kilwinning. Ended up nipping into Kilwinning for the second half, and Danny looks a good player. He's very much got ability. Yeah, there's probably an argument for Neil McPherson being the top centre half. Scott Rumsby, Callum Gow,
Craig
Little, yeah. What about lads, Chris? I actually saw your hero the other day in Silverburn.
Oh, Will Sewell, eh?
Yeah, Will Sewell. So I was walking through Silverburn, said hello to Will. So apologies if it was George, because sometimes I get them mixed up. But I'm sure it was Will that I saw walking through Silverburn. But yeah, there's a big debate about the top 5 centre halves, and no doubt Danny's in that discussion.
To be honest, it's a funny one because obviously I do the FM ratings for kind of all non-league below the Lowland, and there's some guys that definitely need to sort of re-looked at. But what I will say is some guys that I have top in my head are not always top in that game because of potential and whatever else. So it is a difficult one. I mean, it's all subjective anyway and opinions, but I think for me the top one, just for his leadership, the success he's had, it has to be Neil McPherson, I think, for me, in terms of
he's a great centre half. I'm not debating that at all. And also a great person. I've known Neil actually before I knew him playing for Auckland Talbot. I knew him. We both were in ice hockey at the time, and certainly knew Neil through that. And he's a great person, great centre half. He's done it all. But my tweet was probably based on the fact that try to be positive about Kilwinning, because I think obviously the club has went through a bit of a difficult sticky patch in the last couple of weeks with change of manager, change of personnel within the committee and stuff like that, and it's been probably quite doom and gloom. But to then go and sign a player of Danny's calibre and on deadline day, effectively as it is for non-league teams in the West, so it's a really positive thing. Did a bit to help the club out on Tuesday just to make sure that those transfers were able to happen, and I did it because I ultimately want to see the club succeed, and having a player of Danny's calibre will only do that. So that's enough about me. I think that's been the first 15-20 minutes talking about what I've been up to and what we're doing. So let's move on to all the different things that have been happening over the last few months anyway. There's obviously a lot to talk about. Let's just go straight into it. The Lowland League title race is hotting up. We have, Clydebank sitting top of the table right now. Bonnyrigg Rose in second, Linlithgow in third, and Trent in fourth. Trent are probably out of it, let's be frank. Not sad about that at all, to be quite honest. But, I think for me, Clydebank are an excellent team. They are, back on the winning ways and not hardly conceding goals, winning matches by 4-5-0 quite a lot. They look a great team, but let's not discount Bonnyrigg.
Bonnyrigg drew Berwick, if I remember correctly, and it did seem kind of doom and gloom. I remember listening to Johnny Stewart's interview, and he did feel like, it's out of our hands now, which it is. But at the end of the day, I see the fixtures that the top 4 or top 3 clubs have, and I could see them losing them as easily as I could see them winning them. You know what I mean? Clydebank, they've hit form at the right time. I think if I go back to my last thing I said about the title race, Clydebank were always this season they were scraping by in terms of results sometimes, and I really wanted to see, because I knew everyone looks at Clydebank and that they're capable of these 4-5-0, 6-0 results. And that's what they've been doing the last few games, and they're peaking at the right time, basically. And I think it's similar to Linlithgow in a sense. I'll tell you why, Ben, because they obviously lost Dylan Patterson when they were on that tear earlier in the season, and I think that was a big injury. That was a big injury for them, obviously. And he's coming back. Blair Henderson, who's probably not been fit all season, is coming back and scoring goals for them. So it's all about timing, and I think certainly for Clydebank anyway, the timing's right for them. Linlithgow similar, and it's going to be a massive game next week. Linlithgow versus Clydebank. That could be, a lot of people were trying to figure out which fixture was going to be the title decider. For me, that could be the title decider.
No, I think, when you look at Clydebank, you see that goal they scored yesterday, they've got the complete package. Mothball is alive and well. It's, playing...
Did you see that goal? No. Did you see that goal this day?
Ridiculous. Mothball is well and truly, underway at Clydebank. They've got guys that are, top quality players all across the pitch, from, 2 first choice goalkeepers ultimately with Andy Leishman and Owen Stott. They've got strong centre back pairings and David Syme, Matt Niven, Aaron Preston, Chris McGowan. They're all very, very good players at this level. Each position you've probably got a player that comes in every time. Look at Neil McLaughlin. He's phenomenal player. Neil McLaughlin. If Neil McLaughlin doesn't win the Player of the Year, I'll be shocked.
There's 2 outstanding players, I would say, in terms of contributions and how good they've been. There's 2 players that I think of this season. One of them is Neil McLaughlin, because I'm not saying if Clydebank didn't have him, they wouldn't, someone maybe pick it up, but certainly he's been a massive factor in them being where they are. The amount of goals he's scored. Neil, the thing with Neil, we obviously know about Neil. He's obviously been in the league before with Caledonian Braves and East Kilbride. He's a technically brilliant player. I think the knock on Neil is obviously he's got a wee bit of timber about him, which I think he knows. He gets slagged for, and he loves he loves putting it in. And I think if it wasn't for that, because if it wasn't for maybe the image that people have of Neil, I reckon he could be playing in the Championship. And I'm not even bullshitting about that, really. I honestly think he's technically good enough that he could be playing that high.
He's definitely capable for me. I think we've known him for a long time in terms of certainly what he did for East Kilbride and things like that. And I think he had a season at St Cadoc's, I think it was.
Yeah.
In the West, I've seen him play a couple of times for them, and talented player. But you're right. You're probably people take one look at him and go, he's not going to be fit for this level. But it doesn't matter because he's technically gifted. His ability to score is ridiculous. He's finishing. He's probably unrivaled at this level of football. And for me, he's a mega talented player. But then again, like I say, you've got players all over the pitch. Like what they mentioned a couple. Dean Cairns is somebody that has came through the ranks from Rob Roy to Darvel now to Clydebank, and again looks outstanding when you see him play every week. Some of the passes he makes in games to really create some chances for Clydebank is
that through ball for the team goal was absolutely like perfection. I think I even said that on Twitter. It was the whole play, like from the first touch from Neil, Nicky Lowe, back heel, ball through, ball in, goal. That is at all levels of football this season. I don't think I've seen a better team goal. Honestly, hand on heart, I don't think I've seen a better team goal in all levels of football this season.
I think Clydebank have scored a few like that, to be honest, mate. I think I saw a video from Clydebank the other week. I don't think it's actually on social media. I'm talking out of turn here probably, but it was their goal of the season, clip. And there was a couple like that I'd have said to where, the finish doesn't get the credit because it's just a tap in, but the build up is insane in terms of what it is. When we're looking for a goal of the season, you're probably looking for a screamer from 30 yards. First time volley, whatever it is. The overhead kicks. These are the goals that usually win goal of the season. But for me, that was at any level, a top quality goal.
Yeah, and I better mention the other person since I mentioned Neil McLaughlin, because I'll probably get asked this if I don't. But the other player that sticks out to me is Lennon Walker for Caledonian Braves. I think he's had a brilliant season. I think he's near enough the top scorer if he's still not already the top scorer. I've not checked in a couple of days, so could be Neil McLaughlin, could be Lennon Walker, could be anyone really.
Here's Anthony, back-to-back hat tricks and all that.
Yeah, Keir Sampson's definitely getting back in the mix as well. So Lennon for me has been another player that, again, he's played in the league before. It's not really been much of a revelation because he was always a good player, but Cali Braves this season, I think he's more as a channel forward. I mean, the boy, in fairness, from what I've seen, gets kicked every game. He's had some shocking tackles on him, and he gets up, and it's surprising when a player at his age, usually they'll be staying down, kind of selling it a wee bit more to get guys in trouble. But he's got a sturdiness about him this season that's really impressed me. Plus, obviously, what he's done in terms of scoring goals. It's just a wee bit of a shame that Cali Braves couldn't really stick to the title chase, if you will, like other clubs have.
I think Cali Braves have a lot of credit for what they have done, because I think Cali Braves, going back 4, 5, 6 years ago, were the kind of laughing stock of this level of football because of the way they kind of built the club up and the gimmicky stuff on social media trying to get people invested in the club. But I think for me, a lot of credits to go to Chris and the guys up there at Cali Braves. I just seen recently David Byrne, the general manager, has left to go to Wraith Rovers, and that's great. I mean, that's brilliant for him to get involved at Cali Braves, to support them and build himself up to then get a full-time job in football, which that's what we all probably do it for, if you're that way inclined. And I think Cali Braves have built their brand the right way, and they're going about their business in the right way. And I think hats off to them, because I think knowing how it is to run a football club is difficult. That's something that I'm all too aware of, and these guys need a lot of plaudits for what they've been trying to do.
To be fair, I think this episode's a bit weird because I think had we been in podcasts all year, I've had a severe lack of interest in most of the stuff this season. I think it's because the split. Like, I don't think there's too much excitement there for me. I think the most exciting end to the season is because there's simply 3 or 4 teams that can still win the league. But because of the split, even in the divisions below, it's like, 4 or 5 clubs or 6 clubs go up anyway. So it's like, so it's ruined the excitement a wee bit. Obviously, in the Lowland, there's no relegation neither. So it's like there's not really much to talk about other than the run. And I think we came back at the right time then, really.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we also always talk about the meh clubs in the middle. It probably feels a bit like that's extended this year because of the lack of relegation. But then I think it also gives a kind of false image of the football level. I've seen a lot of kind of stick coming for teams in the West, for example, because they maybe haven't seen us trying, for example, and maybe not being as successful as they want to be. But I take Kilwinning Rangers as an example. Get promoted because of the demise of Broomhill. Very fortunate to be in the Premier League. Sitting just above relegation spots in a normal season. If Kilwinning were to get into the Premiership and then survive the relegation, that'd have been a quite a good season for us. In terms of how it went, and I think, and going back to the Lowland League, teams have probably we've heard some discussions about teams who have probably cheapened their budget a little bit to try and save money because they knew there's no threat to relegation into the club. And is that the right thing to do? I don't think so. But if that's the club's prerogative, then fair play. That's up to them, and hope it works out, because will players want to go and play for the next season when there's all these other teams, for example, coming in from the West who will become more of an attractive proposition for players in the future, and likewise in the East, because there'll be a freshness. I think that's the thing to look forward to, is the freshness around the next season too.
One club, I guess, that probably might have been in the meh category, but I think I've actually done really well this season is Cumbernauld Colts with John Doyle, David Gormley. They won the Lowland League Cup. They moved up to 6th in the league. I mean, I had heard a lot of chat about a lot of people are obviously looking to the split and saying, teams like Cumbernauld Colts will be bottom of the Lowland League West. They won't be able to compete. I'm like, John Doyle knows that level. David Gormley knows that level. And Colts, by the way, have a very good team. I mean, we talk about teams that have brought players in that have maybe been really good and they've came down from the SPFL. Colts, over the last few years, have built that team. You've got young guys that have came from development, Daniel Hatfield, guys like that now have maybe 3, 4, 5 seasons of the Lowland League under their belt. They've actually been kind of progressed from Cumbernauld Colts, and I think that's probably the difference for them. And now it's becoming more successful. And obviously, guys like Josh Jack have had a brilliant season. they brought in the right guys. Callum Home came back, Liam Allison as well. I think he's injured now, but I mean, it's been brilliant for the Colts, and I just can't see them not being the same in the Lowland League West. I think it's maybe just that sort of attitude, really. Like, obviously, you're going to expect the likes of Talbot and that to do well next season, but I wouldn't disregard Colts or any of these sort of teams neither. You know what I mean?
I think I got to agree with you, Chris, in terms of Cumbernauld Colts. A great season, winning the Lowland League Cup. You know, a great achievement for John and Gorms. You know, up there, I still talk to Gorms on a occasional basis. He's, you know, was at Kilwinning for a spell, and I'm just glad to see those guys doing well, you know, in the West. But I think the danger that we'll have next season is that, well, they better, you know, hold on to these West players, because I think you probably find that the carrot of playing higher up for Cumbernauld Colts is probably there, you know, just now in terms of, you know, the tiers. But with a lot of these West, you know, teams coming into the division, well, better offers come for some of these guys. I don't know the kind of finance situation at Cumbernauld Colts, but, you know, if a boy's based in Glasgow and he's got an opportunity to go to, you know, a Drumchapel, a Pollock, a Johnston Borough, for example, and get enhanced money or you know, better chances to, you know, progress, then you might struggle a little bit to hold on to players. I think that would be my concern for Cumbernauld Colts, especially the better players. And yeah, but I don't think they'll be, you know, whipping boys. I don't agree with that. You know, people thinking they'll be down the bottom. You know, I think, you know, the teams come up from the south are probably going to find it difficult. You know, what will Albion Rovers and East Stirlingshire do next season in terms of, you know, probably having to rebuild again from their perspective and maybe be, you know, in and around that kind of bottom kind of half, I think, personally. And then, you know, we still don't know how many teams are going to come up from into the West. I know it's a lot more kind of stable over on the East side, but in the West it could be 9, it could be 10, depending on, you know, so the varying equality will be, you know, very apparent come next season.
I have seen a lot of hypothetical leagues going about, and it annoys me because no one really knows at this. I mean, people are saying that Celtic B are out of it. They've not announced anything yet. It's not like Hearts B that. Yeah, so no one knows. No one knows. I've seen all these hypothetical leagues getting thrown about on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that, and it annoys me. It's like you don't know who's coming up. Tayport the other day in the Midlands League, or the other week, I should say, said that they wouldn't accept an invite. We don't know about Stranraer reserves. They might fancy coming up to Lowland League West. There's so many. I just think it's worth sort of hypothesising about it. I know we've done that last year, but that's because we literally had evidence of how it would be, basically.
Yep.
At the moment, we don't. So yeah, it's the sort of thing that annoys me. It's like, just wait, just be patient. We'll find out.
A lot of time being spent on hypotheticals, which would probably be done, you know, in a better way. It feels a bit like, yeah, let's wait and see. It very much depends on, you know, what happens at the top end of the Lowland League, then the playoffs, you know, at the bottom of, you know, League 2 as well. So there's still loads to, you know, to happen in the next 3, 4, 5 weeks before we actually have a real kind of strong idea. So probably one other thing to cover off, Chris. University of Stirling beaten by Cumbernauld in the South Challenge Cup final. It must be absolutely stinking to be University of Stirling having lost 3 cups now. That is cup finals.
It's a shame. It really is a shame. I feel really bad for Chris. I think all the managers over the course of doing this, I've kind of been the closest with Chris. I've learned a lot from him in terms of the uni stuff. I mean, obviously we support them in terms of the Bucks stuff. We always want to see them to do well. They won the Bucks again in January. I said at the time, you know, I watched the game against Nottingham for the British Championship, which is another Bucks trophy, and it just seemed like Nottingham, I'm sure they beat them for the Bucks trophy, so it's maybe like they had that wee incentive of revenge, and then the conditions never helped them really, the heavy rain during the game, so it was really difficult to get back in. Cumnick are a good side, you know, the South Challenge Cup. Swifty, obviously, I'm delighted for him, albeit I am kind of sad for Chris. The Queen's Park Shield, Heriot Watt. Chris has lost that before to Heriot Watt. I think what I'll say, I mean, there's time. I still remember things about football when I was like 12 that pissed me off, you know what I mean? So I could only imagine what it's like losing 3 cup finals. But at the end of the day, they have had success in the Bucks. They're probably going to win the Development League, the under-20s. So there is success there, thankfully. But there's players that play their whole careers and don't even have the chance for a cup final. At least they achieved something in that sense. The guys that are staying for the Bucks, they'll have their chances again for success. Maybe not as far as, like, say, the South Challenge Cup, but certainly in the Bucks competitions, they'll have their chance. But yeah, use that energy. Use that disappointment and energy to push on. And if you ever get in the situation again of being in a final, take your opportunity, use that sort of disappointment and push yourself forward in your career, and hopefully you'll be successful. But yeah, massively disappointed for Chris and the boys there.
I think the thing is about University of Stirling is it's probably a bit of a lottery every year to see what sort of players are coming into the team. If you thinking back to me, we're doing these episodes week in week out, we're talking about guys like Marcus Lavery, Jake Service, Kieran McInnes, Cammy McKinley, great players who have went on to do good things at the level. And that's the thing you're seeing maybe this year is that they don't have the same quality of player because how the uni system works. And I think Chris might tell me I'm completely wrong there, but I think if I think back to previous uni teams where they were finishing fourth in the league, for example, winning everything that season and playing 2 games in one day and all that sort of stuff they did previously with different squads and winning 2 trophies and stuff like that. I think that's the thing for me that I couldn't really tell you a player very much that plays in the University of Stirling team, but I can write me off 5, 6, 7 players that played there 2 or 3 seasons ago that I still think of and still probably keep an eye on in the levels nowadays because I remember them fondly when they were doing well for uni.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you've got Ben Heal that's probably been there the longest. Finn Moffat's had a great season in terms of his goal scoring. Thomas Wonk, Lewis Blaine at the back. I mean, there is a few guys, obviously. Carter Jenkins has been in the league for a wee bit, but I get what you're saying. Obviously, there has been. I mean, you think about it, it was only a few years ago Stirling Uni finished second in the Lowland League. You know what I mean? So, and it's a big. They do go down a tier a wee bit sometimes. They went sort of mid-table, up to really being one of the better teams of Lowland, back down to mid-table. But I think it's all due to the, like you say, the changing of the guard, basically losing a lot of the senior players to go on and move club. But it's a difficult one for Chris. But I just wish the boys all the best, and hopefully they can pick themselves up and they're not the heads are not down too much.
What you always say about University of Stirling is they will, bring through a great number of players who will go on and do things in the game, at different levels, whether that be, some boys that went to League 2, League 1 in the past. I'm sure there'll be boys in that University of Stirling team that will go and play in West, East, North, South, whatever it is, in the future and have really successful careers once they've finished their uni. So, I mean, hats off to uni in terms of the development, pathway that they have for players and really give them a platform to showcase their talents. And then, if they can move on to better things. I'm sure, one player that stood out for me a few years back with Jake Service. He's now playing, I think, at Gretna. Was a player that I really admired. I actually tried to probably sign it, get Kilwinning, early in the season when we were crying out for a defensive player, and unfortunately just signed for Gretna just before we managed to get in touch with him. But that's the thing for me. I think you've got to give the guys a lot of credit up there. They do a great job. They're essentially full time, so the guys are getting the real kind of conditioned really well how to play and how they learn. And Chris is a great manager, so I think fair play to them. Hopefully they bounce back. And again, I don't think they'll be by any means whipping boys in the new Lowland League setup when they move across. I think they'll be more than capable of holding their own in the Lowland League East. Moving on, talking about the Lowland League East, Chris. There's been some sort of noise about different teams and obviously coming out they're like getting a license and moving up and into the setup with the split coming. One we've seen recently is Tapor, who have said they won't take a position within the in the Lowland League East if they're invited. I believe Broughty are sitting top of the Midlands League just now, and they are positioned to be promoted as well. And I've heard sort of rumours that they might not take their position as well. So it's a really interesting angle to take, Chris.
We talked about this last year. Of course, it's like us to be ahead of the curve, but I think I think there was meant to be something. I think we had this discussion whether clubs could have the say whether to sort of stay in their division if they felt they weren't ready. But then obviously the SFA, I think, came back and said, oh, it's part of your licence that you have to go up or whatever. I mean, Broughty, it's different for me with them. If they win that league and don't want to get promoted, then I think it's fair for action to be taken against them. When it comes to Tayport, I mean, the last time I checked, I think they were third in the Midlands League. See, that's a bit different because to me, if you're third in the Midlands League and you're not ready to come up to Lowland, I think that's perfectly acceptable. I really do. I think it's, with all respects to the Midland Leagues, I think that is, I mean, you're probably looking at maybe, 6, 7, 8, I don't know how many East of Scotland teams that probably are ready for the Lowland League East. I would take one of them instead of a Tayport. I really would, and I don't think Tayport should be punished. Especially if they were champions and won the league, I think it's a lot different than if you finish third or fourth.
I think for me, it's obviously it's a period of reconstruction in the league, and I think you've just got to really, to deal with it. For me, I don't think it's right that you can go at we're not ready. We don't want to go up. I think you've got to be fully bought into the pyramid, and by doing that, then having your license, that's all felt well and good, right? So you take a position in the league below. You still get a license. You still get the Scottish Cup. The advantages that Scottish Cup brings. It doesn't sit right with me that at all. I think if you're going for your license and you're bought in, then you should be going into whatever league. And if you are a Tayport, for example, who have said that they won't take a position, I think you just got to go and do it. And if you get relegated, you get relegated, and you go back down. You go and play the next season in the Midlands League. If that's what's to happen, I just don't think it's right. And I think if they are punished, then hell mend them as far as I'm concerned.
I think there's more. I think they alluded to other implications for that, though. Obviously, finances being one of them with the travel, and I mean we've heard that has been one of the reasons for the league split and whatnot. I mean, obviously I'm not too fond of the split myself, but I think it's fair in regards. But I mean, like I say, I don't even really care for that as an excuse. I literally just don't think it's right for to force like a team that finishes third or fourth up if they don't want to, because it's not like they won the league. It's not like it was on merit, if that makes sense.
But you knew what the league situation was going to be at the start of the season. If there was however many teams coming up from the Midlands League, that was always planned. It wasn't as if it's just kind of been sprung on them. So for me,
they haven't. To be fair, they did say they haven't had an invite yet. So it's kind of like
no one has, though. That's the thing. That's been facetious, I think, a little bit. Because none of us have actually been invited into the setup because we haven't finished the leagues yet. You'll be invited once your league position is confirmed and the playoffs and things like that have all took place and we all know what's going to happen. And I think clubs have just got to go and take the bull by the horns and just get on with it. And if it's a season of struggle, then so be it. I would feel that about winning as well. Albeit that I'm obviously no longer involved, and I still, if we were to go up, it might be difficult for us potentially. But we've just got to take it in the chin and fight a relegation battle perhaps, or win the league depending on how good we are. That's what every club should be looking at and just going, this is a big change. It's going to be a completely new setup for everyone. I think for me a positive setup, but I think it's something we've got to look forward to and grasp and get on with it and see what we can make of it. And I think it's a good time as well to maybe modernise and change a few things around what we're doing in football. I think I've obviously alluded to some stuff through the catch-up, about doing live streaming and things like that for games, and that's something I'm quite passionate about. I think we need to maybe jump on board with that and get new eyes on the game, and that's just some of the things is a good time as we change the format of the leagues, freshen it up, get new sponsorship, all that sort of good stuff needs to happen to allow the level to thrive.
Yeah, and just to be sort of clear about it, I'm like of the opposite opinion of you, Ben. At the moment, anyway. Obviously, my opinion could change over a summer with no football, but certainly, I've always felt the split's been a backward step, just simply because, fair enough, we have a West and East. We've got 16 or whatever, many more teams in Tier 5, but what's the point? The Tier 5, you're going to be content. You're going to have more teams content at Tier 5, and I feel when teams get content, that's when they get complacent. That's when the standard drops, and it's going to really be hard for teams to have ambition if there's only going to be a handful of them with bronze licenses. So I don't like it, but obviously my opinion can change as it has done over the last 7 or 8 years.
The thing for me is it's a freshness. How often have we talked about those teams, the meh teams, if you like, and in between, third and third bottom, not really doing anything in terms of, anything of note for the last however many years. This just freshens it up for everyone. The fans will get to go to new grounds, we'll get to play new, teams and get to see some new players and stuff like that. There'll be potentially, a bit of a playoff, to happen as well. That could, bring some excitement. The Lowland League Cup becomes maybe fresher as well. We talked about that the other day in one of the group chats about how how the Lowland League Cup be set up. Hopefully, it's an all-in Lowland League Cup for all 30. And the Lowland League, and we get to play each other. We'll still have the South Challenge Cup, I assume, and it probably brings us nicely to talk about the Junior Cup or the Communities Cup, however it's called these days. I think you're talking about having a national league set up. What's your appetite for a national cup, Chris?
Oh God, I don't get the logic. I literally don't get the logic of breaking the leagues apart for travel expenses and then adding a national cup, which adds travel expenses. So no, I mean, like, I'm not against it. I just can't get the logic. It makes no sense to me to do it. It's like, oh yeah, we want less travel for teams. Yeah, let's add a national cup between us and the Highland League. All right, okay, makes no sense to me whatsoever. But as a spectator, I'm not against it.
I think you're right. I think that there's a lot of work to be done around the National Cup competition to find a kind of way to regionalise things and make it work before it becomes an all-in scenario. No, I definitely can argue against that all day long. I think my colours are well and truly nailed to the mast when it comes to the Communities Cup, as it's called now. I'm not a fan of it, and probably never will be.
Large have a chance of winning it, so if they win it, then I'm all for it. Like.
Absolutely, of course they do. That's right. A great season for Largs. I hope they do well. I do got a lot of time for some people at Largs. So yeah, let's hope we do well. Moving on then, Chris. Let's see. Sticking in the east, one team to talk about, Bo'ness Athletic. They have decided to call it a day at the end of the season because they feel as if that the town of Bo'ness doesn't really need two teams to be, competing against each other, and they've kind of essentially stepped aside. For me, I think that is an absolutely admirable thing to do from the people who run, Bo'ness Athletic. They've done a sterling job, shall we say, bringing them through to the Premiership. They've obviously produced some great players. Daramola, Dylan Park, 130 goals in one season. They were phenomenal. So Bo'ness have definitely brought in, a lot of good players over the years, and I think for me, it's very admirable to step aside to allow the town to have, to get behind one team. I think that's something that I've always been advocate. Certainly in Kilwinning, we have two teams with Eglinton and Kilwinning, but I've always been I would prefer it to have one team, one senior team, pushing it, and that's what Bo'ness have done, and a lot of credit has to go to the guys behind the scenes who have made that probably tough decision, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably been a bit of speculation in terms of what's going on there, but you just have to take their word from what they said in the statement, and it makes sense to me because obviously a lot of people forget that some of the teams, like especially Bo'ness United, have lots and lots of history with junior cups, teams going back decades basically. I'll take the statement at face value, and I think you're right. It's completely admirable. It makes sense in terms for a town like Bo'ness to have one team. I mean, I don't really want to talk on rumours, but I am curious if some of the Bo'ness people, Bo'ness Athletic people, will get involved with Bo'ness United. Maybe it's a possibility. And from a personal point of view, I'd love to see that because it feels like certainly they have been a driving force behind the success at Athletic. If they can get involved at United and do the same for them and help them out, I think that would be a positive outcome for everyone, really.
I think that's the right thing for absolutely. If got good people behind the scenes that are doing good things, then one force pushing in the same direction is definitely what a town the size of Bo'ness needs. So I think they've got a great setup up there up at in Newton Park.
Yeah,
I'm very much a team that I like to keep an eye on, and because of the players, I loosely know some people that were involved in the past up there, and a couple of guys are kind of supporters of Bo'ness Athletic and United. Because I think a lot of fans maybe cross over and go and watch both teams as well. I don't think there's a kind of us versus them mentality ever been up there. That's never been the case, and I don't think towns like that need more than one team. You look at East Kilbride, they've got fuck knows how many teams, 4 or something.
It's crazy, I mean.
Certainly got 3 in the west, or 2 in the west of Scotland, and obviously the League 2 team, as it is a team that we have spoken, a lot about over the years, and very successful team and doing great things again. And I hope they go on to do what they can and win that league and get themselves up to League 1. But yeah, I think towns like that need to really think about how many teams they have and get behind it, because all you're doing is diluting the player pool, the funds, the sponsors, all that sort of stuff gets diluted because you might find somebody likes the chairman of one team, the chairman of the other, so they give them £100 each rather than giving them £200, which would probably be what would happen if the person was going to throw the money at a football club, and that's maybe what's happening up at Bo'ness, is that maybe diversions of funds is happening, and people and fans and all that sort of stuff. So no, good luck to them. I hope Bo'ness United do well over on the Lowland League East next season, and I'm sure they'll be more than capable and be a force up there as it unfolds. Moving on then, Chris, to a couple of other teams that I've seen kind of it's pretty much statement season, isn't it, from some clubs in the west. BSC Glasgow have done a similar kind of thing to Bo'ness. They've called it, albeit 4 games early, which has caused a bit of a consternation amongst teams in the 4th division of the west of Scotland.
I said something obviously on Twitter about saying it did seem a wee bit unfair. That's all I said. And Kenny, as he does, obviously quoting the rules, obviously the results had to be expunged. Like, I just thought it was a wee bit. It's not like been previous seasons. We've lost a lot of clubs over the course. Obviously, you think about the first year that we done the catch-up, Selkirk sort of went extinct, if you will. Right at the start of the season, we have had Rosyth, we've had Eyemouth, we've had Teston Rovers leaving the south of Scotland. Obviously, Broomhill, the original BSC Glasgow. But this situation's a wee bit different in the sense that they've not managed to fill the fixtures. West Park United obviously were a wee bit aggrieved, simply because this whole thing could potentially cost them a league title. I get that clubs voted for this to happen. If this situation arose, they voted for fixtures or the results to be expunged. But at the end of the day, I think they should be allowed to share their grievances, if you will, because it is frustrating if you think about it. They played the games, they won the points. There's never going to be a fair outcome because obviously BSC Glasgow, you can't play them games if they don't have a team or whatever. But yeah, I didn't like the fact that I felt that the league were kind of holding West Park back a wee bit from being aggrieved, which they, even though, fair enough rules, there's still going to be a bit of annoyance there either way. And I think for every club should have the right to say something on it.
I think the thing though, I think West Park were aggrieved about the rules and were having an issue with the rules, as if the league had done that to them. Maybe they should be aggrieved at BSC Glasgow rather than the league, because ultimately BSC folding is the reason that's happened. It's not because the league's put a rule in place, because it's like everything that happens, and especially in the West, I've noticed it happen plenty of times. People complain about something, they check the rule book says X, and then it comes down to the AGM, and nobody then puts forward a motion to change the rules. So you complain about it and nothing happens. So from a BSC perspective, Barry McColgan, the manager, was moving on to join St Ants, which by all accounts Barry was basically running the BSC Glasgow kind of senior team by himself. Pretty much. It sounds like he was kind of secretary, chair. I don't know if he's chairman or what, but he certainly was doing a lot of things behind the scenes to keep that club going. And when he then decides he's moving to St Anne's, a team with a lot of history and a lot of good standing within
non-league entirely, I would say,
are very much fabricated in this level of football, and have got a lot of doing a lot of good things. It's difficult. The chain of events occurs because Paul McDougall, who's the manager of St Anne's, leaves and then turns up at Kilwinning Rangers as a coach, and then they bring in a manager and Barry McColgan, who then basically is keeping BSC afloat, and because that happens, the players are left in a difficult position, and the club can't continue. So it's unfortunate for West Park. I understand their pain, but it's unfortunately the rules, and no one likes to see clubs go bust. That's not. Of course. It's a sad day when any team goes bust. I've seen it last year with Broomhill. As much as Kilwinning had a positive outcome from that, it was still disappointing for Broomhill and the guys behind the scenes at Broomhill, and certainly feel the same for BSC. And it's a shame it's played out that way. And West Park, they might not win a league, but they'll still get promoted. That's the thing. You might not get and whoever does win the league, you could probably argue it's a tainted title, if you like. Because,
Asterisk title,
that's it. That's probably and not that it's important, because ultimately, as long as you get promoted next season, that's the main achievement for clubs within the divisions of the West. So
I'll add to that, Ben. Obviously, just before we probably move on from this, but I have seen a lot of nonsense posts about this, accusations being made and whatever else. I don't know if you sort of saw the stuff yourself, but I think Barry Colgan did say that he's going to say, it'll come out eventually. But I don't want to speculate. I mean, I've seen a few accounts, Facebook, Twitter, that have came out with a lot of nonsense, I would say, over the last sort of few months.
I think so. I think one particular account I did see, given it, they had sources about this and I'm sources about that. Now, that's a lot of it was wide in the mark. I'm good pals with Mark McKenna at St Anne's, and know exactly what was going on with them, and it was very much he was very transparent with most people about what was happening, and had a difficult thing to do in terms of replacing a manager with 4 games to go before the end of the season. It was hard for them, and they had to find the right person to keep that club going and do what they're doing. So I don't think there was anything nasty or deliberate done by anyone. That was the thing. You've got to look after yourself sometimes, and that's just what St Anne's have done by bringing in Barry, because they obviously rate him as a coach and somebody who's going to bring in decent players who are going to hopefully take St Anne's on back to up the tables, because they've had a few years of difficult relegations and changes in finances and things like that. Obviously, probably play a part for them, but I would rather see St Anne's hang about the leagues than BSC, if I'm being brutally honest, because I think BSC is another kind of development team with hardly any fans and such like. So I'd rather see St Anne's survive over BSC any day of the week.
I felt bad for St Anne's at the start of the season, because obviously I had to put them down a list, if you will. I've got the league list, and they were like, it still hurts or whatever. So St Anne's are a great club, and obviously we wish them well. Just on the sort of nonsense factor. I mean, the worst one I've probably seen recently is one about a club could get the license because the coach didn't have his UEFA B or something. It's like, not every manager has UEFA B license, you know what I mean? So you can literally, if anyone else at that club, you could just have them in a different role. It's not going to make a huge difference for the licensing, you know what I mean? So it's utter nonsense.
All you need is your 1.3, to be a manager at this level of football.
Yeah.
I think there probably was a club that had an issue with getting a license because of that, but it wasn't because they needed a UEFA B license. That was miles from accuracy. But so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out with the whole noise. I think that'll hopefully calm down, and St Anne's can get on with it, and try and stabilise a little bit, and move on from that next season with Barry and the charge. And for Barry, it's probably a good move as well, because they do have a strong committee behind them there that can they can help them and make sure they get things done, and Barry can focus on being a football manager. And that's probably why he moved to St Anne's, I'd imagine, because he was probably doing it all for himself, and that's something I think they can be probably pretty hard at that level of football to try and do it all. Moving on then, Chris, let's look at the south of Scotland. We haven't touched on that a great deal yet. The south of Scotland is, in a difficult situation, shall we say. I think, they've a couple of teams are going to move up to the Lowland League West. They're going to
potentially. We should say potentially.
Potentially, sorry.
We don't know yet. We don't know.
If people are listening, yeah, we'll say potentially. They maybe have zoned out by now and moved on because they've had their say earlier on. But yeah, potentially moving up. They have a few licensed clubs certainly in the South of Scotland League. There has been some indication that some South of Scotland teams will or have applied to join the West of Scotland Football League as well, which the West of Scotland have come out and basically said that they won't accept applications from South of Scotland teams for 1 year and put that basically their application into abeyance, as they call it, because they want to give the South of Scotland a chance to, find new teams and keep going. So one team I think that look like they've joined the South of Scotland League, Chris, Saltire City. What do you make of them?
I actually, we've been kind of through this before with Glasgow Wellington, and I've actually been waiting more on your reaction to Saltire City are an interesting one. I mean, I've seen some signings they've got already, and I'm actually quite impressed with the signings they've made. I don't really get we had a discussion about this on Twitter, obviously, about the use of AI. I know Elgin City, for example, are getting absolutely slagged for their AI use. But Saltire City just seem to be completely AI. So all their posts are AI. It's a very strange situation. But I know you have different views. So I'll say this about Saltire City. The South of Scotland League needs more clubs. It's a tiny league. So I'm not against the Glasgow team with no roots, with all respects, going to the South of Scotland. Had it been a former junior side that was always a part of the juniors, for example, or it was in the West of Scotland and they moved to the South of Scotland, I'd probably have issues there. But the fact that it's kind of like a new club, no roots, it doesn't really bother me.
I think it's absolutely fucking nonsense. Nobody knows really anything about it. This is the thing. Like, there's very limited information coming out about Saltire City. It just feels so gimmicky. It's so nonsense. Like, and that's before even talking about the fact they're joining the South of Scotland League. Now, they're joining the South of Scotland League, but as I understand it, they may still join the West of Scotland League. That's the kind of there's a discussion there, I think, to be had about potentially their application to the West of Scotland to be reopened. As well. I've heard that discussion take place. So I don't know what they're doing. I genuinely don't know. And if I'm a player, fair play. They made a big deal about a boy signing from Airdrie under 20s the other day.
There's definitely a couple of players, Ben, that will be good for South of Scotland level that I've seen. Then
you ask yourself, right? Like, if you know that kind of level much better than I do. But if you're a player like that, surely you can find a better team to go to than some AI bot driven nonsense. Playing out of probably a cage.
Say how you feel, Benny.
Somewhere in Glasgow. I don't think that's a football team. And that's just how it is. And I'll probably take a bit of stick from whoever does back that team or whatever, and so be it. That's fine. I've taken a stick off of fucking Johnston Borough, Kirky Rob Roy, Trinent over the last 10 months or so. Dean Keenan has also had a go at me as well. Now, I'm making plenty of enemies on social media anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Like, to me, Blair McAnally obviously hates me as well, so that's another one to add to the long list of people that dislike me at the moment. But
I think I've only fallen out with Linlithgow and Gordon Hurd this season, so you're actually doing worse than me.
Justifiably, I think anything I've called out, I think it's been fully justified, and that's all it's been. But yeah, I don't agree with the whole thing. I do agree that South of Scotland need more teams, and I hope they can survive. But and obviously 3 moved a couple of seasons back, the West of Scotland. As I say, I think there's been at least 2 teams who applied to join the West of Scotland from the South of Scotland League already. Haven't seen much noise of other teams trying to join the South of Scotland League either. I know there was talking we thought maybe Heston Rovers might appear back at some point. They haven't.
I've heard more about the West teams. Obviously, you've got your I think Castle Milk are coming into the West of Scotland. I think Livingston Community, which is basically like a Livingston FC community club sort of thing, is going into the East. I think there's about 4 or 5 clubs going into the West of Scotland that I know of, and maybe a couple here and there for the East of Scotland. So it's going to be like that, I think, for most seasons.
The West don't need teams, but there's obviously spaces there to fill. In terms of the West, having 8, maybe 9, maybe 10 moving into the Lowland League West, then there's gaps there, and that's fine to balance the numbers out. I'm okay with that. But I think they've got to be the right kind of teams. For example, there's 2 teams called St Pat's Athletic trying to join the West of Scotland. One I think is based in Dumbarton area, and there's another team based in kind of Glasgow way. I know St Pat's tried to join before. Dumbarton or Renton, whatever it is, that they tried to join previously. And certainly, it'll be nice to have new teams and down at the 4th division as it is. It was brought in as a development league, a few years back. The teams that are down there have really got to be trying to push on and try, improve their ground and things like that. They can't just. I don't like this just playing out of sports fields, if you like, KGs, whatever you want to call it. Look at Knightswood, a team that are, building themselves up. EKYM look like a team, like a real team with proper facilities and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's what's important for me, is that if you're coming in, you've really got to be adding something to the leagues, whether that's South of Scotland, West or East. I don't think just coming in for the sake of it is the right thing to do.
Back to BSC Glasgow, for example, we don't want teams that will be that are going to struggle, especially financially, and end up folding. And it kind of ties in with what you said about Bonus Athletic as well. If you look at the region where BSC Glasgow was, in that one area, there was just so many clubs. It's like it would be impossible to build a fan base.
And that's also something that I'd heard from someone in football a few weeks ago. The feeling was a lot of clubs are struggling, in terms of finances and things like that, to pay players and compete with teams and maybe in Ayrshire and things like that when it comes to the finances. So more teams, are great if they're coming in for the right reasons, but there's no point in having teams struggle. I don't think that's the right thing to do. But we'll see how it all shapes up over the next few weeks. But that's pretty much a roundup of what's been happening on the official catch-up while we've been away for the last certainly few months that we've seen. We haven't covered off the different leagues and what's happening in them as much this week because there's still a lot to play for, still a lot to happen. We do plan to come back next week and do another episode, so we'll touch on the football more so next week. There's still a few other topics we'll probably want to talk about. I know the guys in the WhatsApp chat will be desperate for us to talk about Albion Rovers, and probably the East Kilbride guys still want us to talk about East Kilbride, so I'm sure we'll pick up on them. Gretna. I'm sure we'll discuss them plenty at some point. But and ultimately, we've been away for 48 weeks or so. We're nearly a year, but we're back. We're going to do, as I say, probably 3, maybe 4 episodes as a run-in, if you like, covering what's happening across the different leagues. Not everything's changed. Ultimately, West is still best. We've seen that very much clear over the last few weeks and months. Albeit with Clydebank sitting top and coming up winning the South Challenge Cup. So, that's nothing's changed. Tranent are still Tranent and Gretna are still Gretna.
I actually forgot, what's the beef with Tranent again?
Tranent.
You played them, didn't you?
It goes way back, to be honest with Tranent. We played them in the Cup, the Scottish Cup.
Yeah.
I got a bit of stick from the assistant manager at the time. I can't remember. He called me fat anyway, and I didn't like that. And then the fans gave me a bit of stick when we were filming a game against them in the cup and stuff like that. We were down 2-0 and we won 4-2, and it wasn't a pleasant experience, shall we say. But
Scientologists call that fair game if you get a wee bit of stick, yeah.
Exactly. And then obviously recently they posted about a non-penalty on Facebook or Twitter. A few months back they posted about how they didn't get a penalty decision, and that's one of my pet hates in football, is teams posting on social media a decision that goes against them. Rob Roy being the latest benefactors of that. Had they lost Jordan Allen got sent off, and they put up a clip of him getting sent off because they felt it was unfair or something. They couldn't appeal it. I just don't agree with it. We find that difficult time to get referees in this level of football. We don't need to be chastising them on social media for likes. I think that's just, we're better than that.
I have a different view on that.
So, that for another episode, Chris. I think we can go on that bigger.
Yeah, okay. We can go on that another time. But let's just say I've seen a few decisions in the last sort of 2 games that have shocked me from all different levels of the game. One in the East of Scotland, one in the Lowland League, and I think if it's going to cost teams potentially league titles and whatever, I think it's fair to highlight decisions. But I get what you're saying about refs. I know every time I spoke about refs on the catch-up, I got referred to Ref Support UK or whatever it's called. So, yeah.
Anyway, that's all from us on the official catch-up. We will be back next week. If you want to catch us on Twitter, at the official catch-up, get us on YouTube, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. You know, the more likes, the more subscriptions we have on the channel will make us want to do this more. So please do that. It helps us out a lot. We don't do this for any money to gain. So a little like, a little subscription doesn't cost you anything. So go and do that if you enjoyed the episode. It's been good to be back. I've enjoyed the last hour or so speaking to Chris and talking about all the good stuff in football, and I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about next week. But until then, have a good one.